When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. Isn't that beautiful how Jefferson points out that we are entitled to certain rights based on the laws of nature and of nature's God, to assume not powers from government or powers from a king, but powers from the earth, as separate and equal individuals, deriving that power from the laws of nature. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the cause which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, from the consent of those individuals that were entitled to these natural law principles, deriving their power from nature. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. Now, I love how Jefferson restates this again, but he adds one more thing to it. He says it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. So it's not just our right, it's also our duty. We had those that went before us to secure our rights for us, and we then have the duty to secure those rights for future generations. Now, Thomas Jefferson outlines beautifully these fundamental rights in these first two paragraphs in the Declaration of Independence. It's amazing the amount of principles that he puts in just a few short sentences. And what are some of these basic principles? First of all, he declares that there are certain self-evident truths. These are truths that are so clear and so obvious that they are beyond reasonable dispute, and they don't need any outside forces or counsel to declare their truth. They are simply self-evident. He then states that there are certain natural law principles. Now, I love how he establishes these natural law principles as simply the laws of nature. But then he adds to it, by the way, those laws of nature are from nature's God. And then he goes on to say we are created equal. All of us created equal. Now, this is interesting because this presupposes that there is a creator. And that creator has made us all equal, but only in three ways. If you look around at your friends and neighbors and community, you'll see that we come in all different shapes and sizes. And if you go around and ask different people what their different talents are, or their professions, or their income, you'll find that there's all different types of talents, and there's different outcome to the work that they put forth. And so how are we created equal? We're created equal in three ways. First, we are created equal in our rights. Second, we're created equal under the law. And lastly, we are created equal in the sight of God. After those three ways, all bets are off. We are not equal in any other way. Now, what's interesting is what happens when we try to make ourselves equal in any other way other than these three ways. Let's explore this a little bit. If we have two individuals, one has $20 and the other has $10, we see right now under a constitutional government, they have equal rights and they are equal under the law. And so therefore, their property is protected equally. Presumably, there's laws that state that $20 is just as protected as the $10. Now, they may be equal in their rights and equal under the law, but they are unequal in things. Now, some people might have a problem with this. So they might decide, it's okay if we're protected in those rights, but maybe we should also be equal in things. And so in order to make these two individuals equal in things, we take $5 and give it to the $10 individual. Now they each have $15. They're equal in things. The problem is that the $20 individual was not protected in his rights, and it's presumed that we passed a law allowing for this redistribution of wealth. And so therefore, he's not equal in his rights, nor is he equal under the law. So he lost his rights as the other individual gained things. Now, did the individual that gained the $5, did he lose any rights? At a first glance, we might say, no, he just simply gained property. But what would happen if a third individual came along with no things, and that law still existed that those things must be equal? Then from each individual must be given $5, so they all now have $10. And so he now gained things. So the question is, the gentleman in the middle, when did he lose his rights? Did he lose it when the third gentleman came along? No. I propose that he lost it when he accepted the $5 from the first individual. Now, this is a very important principle because quite often we will see our neighbors losing some of their rights, but it doesn't concern us too much because perhaps they're losing their rights in their business and that's not our profession, and so we don't mind so much. But what we don't realize is that when our neighbors lose rights, we lose our rights at the very same time. Now, do we have the right, the unalienable natural law right to move from point A to point B? I think it would be obvious. The answer would be yes. How do we know that we have the right to move from point A to point B? And the answer is obvious, because we have legs. Now, that seems like such an obvious answer, but whenever you discover natural law principles, quite often you know that you've discovered a natural law principle because it feels like you've always known it. You've always known that you could move from point A to point B because you have legs, but you probably never stopped to think about it. But now that you've learned it, it feels like you've always known it. But do we have the right to move from point A to point B in any direction or path that we choose? We do not, because we may interrupt the rights of others, property rights, for example, or their rights to move from point A to point B. Now, would it make any sense for us then, if we're concerned about property rights, for each individual to negotiate with various property owners for us to take whatever path or course that we wanted to home or to work or to the grocery store, and we have to negotiate all these different... It wouldn't make any sense for all of us to do that as individuals because it would be an absolute confusing mess. We'd have roads and paths and trails going all different directions, and we'd have a neighbor that would get upset with us and wouldn't let us take a path that we were used to taking for years, and so it would be quite chaotic. So instead, what do? We get together as a society, and we buy up these long tracts of land, and we put pavement on it and paint some lines on it and put some signs up, and then we create a test about those rules and laws that we have based on driving on those roads, and we give each other the test, and if we pass the test, then we get a driver's license. And so this is what's called a vested right. Driving on a public road is not necessarily an unalienable right. It's a vested right, which is the administration of some of our unalienable rights. Now, once we're on this road, can we go just as fast and far and straight as we want to with our rights? Absolutely, we can, until one thing happens, and that is till we come to an intersection, or until we intersect the rights of others. Now, in an intersection, if you have two individuals going in different directions as fast and far as they want to, if the timing is wrong, then there will be a problem. We'll have an accident at that intersection. So what do we do to prevent that accident? Instead of these two cars colliding, we take that intersection and we govern it. And that basically is what government is for. It's to govern the intersection of rights, where somebody's rights intersects the rights of another's. Now, sometimes we might have to periodically yield our right to the rights of another, but we never truly and wholly give them up. We might have to yield them temporarily, let somebody else go by with their rights, and then we can continue on with our rights. Now, let's explore this principle of rights and the intersection of rights a little bit more thoroughly. Do you have the right to stand at your doorstep with a garden hose in one hand just in case your home starts on fire, you can put it out? Absolutely, you have the right to do that. Do you have the right to sit at your doorstep with a gun in your other hand just in case somebody comes in to assault or attack you and your family? You can protect them? Absolutely, you have that right too. Do we want to do that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Probably not. We want to be able to go to work and go to school and visit with family and friends and things. So instead, we get a hold of Fred over here and we say, Fred, how would you like a job? Oh, I'd love a job, absolutely. What do you want me to do? Well, we're going to give you some big boots and a big coat and a big hat, and we're going to give you a shiny red truck. And when the phone rings, you better answer it because it means that one of our homes is on fire and you've got to come put it out. Can you do that? And Fred said, absolutely, I can do that. Then we get a hold of Sam. Sam, how would you like a job? Oh, I'd love a job. What do you want me to do? Well, we're going to give you a uniform and give you a badge so that people know that we've given you some authority. We're going to let you carry a gun on your side because we have the authority to carry a gun on our side. And we're going to give you a car and we'll put some bubbles on top and we'll let you drive around our neighborhoods. And we just want you to make sure that our property is secure and that nobody is stealing our property or nobody is vandalizing or nobody is attacking or harming our friends or family. Can you do that, Sam? Sam said, absolutely, I can do that. Now, what have we just created here? You might say a police and fire department, which is true, but really, when we boil it down to what this really is, what have we just created? Government. We've just created government. And what gave us the authority to create that government? What gave us the ability to do so? We were able to create that police and fire department because we ourselves had the right to sit at our doorstep with a garden hose in our hand and a gun in the other hand. And so therefore, we have the right to delegate the administration of those rights to our agents, the government. So that's the purpose of government, is to govern the intersection of rights. But in order for them to have the authority to govern that intersection of rights, the people must delegate or give them the permission to administer those rights. So we give them permission by delegating authority to our agents, the government. Now, just how far can we go in delegating authority? So this is my neighborhood here, and I'm here in the middle home, and wife and kid, 4 children, and we've got 1 car. It's a humble living, but we make do. It's kind of tough to get the kids back and forth to school and get to work and things, but we make do. We do all right. And then there's the Smiths next door to me. They have 2 cars, and it's just a husband and wife, no kids. Oh, it's easy life for them. Very easy to get to work and go around and travel wherever they want to. He can bring his wife out on the weekends for a little date night, and so that's just an easy life. And then there's the Joneses. The poor Joneses, husband and wife, 6 kids, no car. That's a very difficult life. Hard to get the kids to school and get to. He can't even bring his wife out on the weekends for a nice date, and so that's a struggle. They have a very difficult time. Now, I'm a kind, compassionate, merciful individual, and so when I'm looking at this imbalance, 2 cars over here and 1 car over here, I'm a little uncomfortable with this. I think it's kind of unfair. And so I decide to go over and talk to Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith, do you know the Joneses? Well, not really, he said. Well, let me tell you a little bit. And I began to tell him the plight of the Joneses. Oh, that's unfortunate, he said. It is unfortunate, I replied. But I've got an idea. Why don't you take one of your cars and give it to the Joneses? Well, that's an idea, all right, he said. Well, actually, it's more than just an idea. I insist. You insist? Get out of here. I'm not going to just take my car and give it to the Joneses. If they want their own car, they can go and earn it themselves. I had to earn my cars. This absolutely infuriates me because I'm a kind, compassionate, merciful individual, and I can't believe how much of a lack of compassion Mr. Smith has. So I go home. I can't even sleep at night. This is just agitating me. And finally, in the middle of the night, I get up. I know a thing or two about cars. And so I go over there to Mr. Smith, and I hotwire that car, and I bring it over to the Joneses. Knock on that door of Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones, here's a nice new car for you. For me? Yeah, absolutely. You can get the kids to school a lot easier. It's a lot easier to get to work, and you can take your wife out on weekends. And sorry I don't have a key, but if you just touch these 2 wires together, you'll do just fine. And so Mr. Jones was quite happy about this. And so I go home and sleep like a baby. Oh, because I'm a kind, compassionate, merciful individual, and I just feel so good about what I've just done, this great deed. And all of a sudden, 3 o'clock in the morning, I get a knock on the door. It's the sheriff. Your fingerprints are all over that car. Well, of course they are. You'd have done the same thing if you were as kind, compassionate, merciful as I am. Well, he didn't want to hear anything about that, so he hauled me off. I ended up doing 5 to 6 years in the slammer. Now, letters from my wife indicates that this injustice, or at least what I perceive to be an injustice, is still taking place. And so I've got this 5 or 6 years to concoct a plan. So I get out of jail, and there's 100 homes in our neighborhood. And I decide to get all my neighbors in on this. And so all of our neighbors get together, and we sign a petition to put on the ballot that Mr. Smith has to give his car to Mr. Jones. And we go around, we get plenty of signatures, and we're good campaigners. And there's 100 homes in our neighborhood. Each home gets one vote. The final vote comes in, it's 99 for and 1 against. Of course, the 1 against is Mr. Smith, Mr. Lack of Compassion, that's going to lose his car. But 99% of the people demanded that we move Mr. Smith's car to Mr. Jones. That's a mandate. That's a voice of the people. Got to listen to the people, right? So 99 of us get in that car and we bring it over to Mr. Jones, and Mr. Jones now enjoys this new vehicle. Now, if you were to do this in your own neighborhood today, what happens next? 99 people go to jail. Because do you have the right as an individual to take from Mr. Smith and give to Mr. Jones? You do not. Do you have the right collectively, do we magically get the right to take from Mr. Smith and give to Mr. Jones? We do not. So if what would be illegal for us to do, is it possible for us to give that to our agents, the government? If we're to operate under the premise that government gets its authority from the people, then can we possibly give government something that we ourselves do not have the authority to do? We cannot. We cannot give that which we don't have. Of course, in our country today, we do this quite often. We go to the legislature and we have them pass some law. What's worse than the law is the fact that we then use the agents of government that are supposed to be there to protect our rights. We then use them to be the ones who actually abuse our rights. So this is a terrible, immoral thing that we do not have the right to do. Delegated authority is an incredibly important principle. We can only delegate that which we ourselves have in the first place. Now, how is it? What's the only way that we can get that car from Mr. Smith to Mr. Jones? If Mr. Jones buys it? Well, what if Mr. Jones offers Mr. Smith $1 million for that car? Does Mr. Smith have to sell it? He does not. So what's the only way to get that car from Mr. Smith to Mr. Jones? The only way to do it morally is if Mr. Smith consents. Whether it's giving, whether it's selling, whether it's refusing and he just brings it to the dump instead, Mr. Jones or Mr. Smith is the only one that can consent to the disposal of that car. Now, what is it that binds Mr. Smith to that car so tightly that he's the only one that can give it or can dispose of it? Now, you might be thinking, well, his property rights or possession is 9/10 of the law or whatever. But what is it that makes property, what binds property to us so that we are the only ones that can consent? Now, we're going to go along with the thinking of John Locke here. John Locke was a great methodical thinker. What a great philosopher of the principles of liberty. Now, when he's trying to contemplate the principles related to property, he's trying to decipher at what point does property become ours and what makes it ours? See, John Locke had already considered the fact that once we are born, we are inherently born with this property, with our body, and nobody else has the right to govern this property except for ourselves without our consent. And so then he's trying to figure out, okay, what else is our property? And he realizes that what we do with this property becomes an extension of this property and therefore is our property as well. And so the way he comes to this conclusion is he's thinking about a wild apple tree. Out in the wilderness, it's on land that nobody owns. It's a wild apple tree. Nobody planted the seed, and so nobody owns it. And he concludes, well, if nobody owns it, God gave us this earth for everybody's use. And so therefore, would an individual need to ask permission of every single person on this earth to pick one of those apples? John Locke immediately realized that this makes no sense, because not only would that individual starve, because that would be an impossibility, but the apple would be wasted as well. And so he realizes that nature certainly could not demand this of the individual. So now he's contemplating, if the individual picks the apple, in fact gathers many apples, puts it all together in a bushel and carries it home and begins preparing and making things out of the apple, apple pie and apple dumplings and apple jacks and whatever else you make out of apples. And he's getting kind of hungry. So he takes that apple and he takes a bite out of it and he begins chewing it up, so he's pre-digesting it. And then he swallows it, and it gets into the stomach, and the stomach acids are continuing to break it down and digest it. And then it goes into the intestines, and the intestines begin absorbing the nutrients. Now we're going to stop right there in the digestive process. At this point, whose nutrients is it? One would say it's his, of course. We certainly don't want it at this point, but it's his nutrients. There's no argument that it's his nutrients. At what point did it become his? When he picked it? When he ate it? Some would say when he ate it. But if it was when he ate it, then that would mean that from the picking to the eating, he had stolen it. So John Locke said, if the first action did not make it his, nothing else could have. So it's the picking it. So what is it about the picking of the apple that made it his? John Locke then went on to explain that it's the fact that he put something of himself into nature that was not already there. He put his labor into it. So he put some of his time, some of his choices to obtain this property. So time plus choice equals property. So if you pay a child an allowance of, say, $5 a week, and they decide to purchase perhaps a video game at $25, it's now taken them 5 weeks and perhaps 100 choices to decide to do the chores, to do them well, what not to buy, what to buy, how much money to save, which video game to purchase. Say you had to make 100 choices. So 5 weeks plus 100 choices equals a video game. So you thought that you purchased a video game with money, but actually you take your time and your choices and you trade that for money that you then trade for additional property that perhaps you buy at the store or whatever. So time plus choice equals property. Now let's change that equation to life plus liberty equals property. Life plus liberty equals property, because property is the fruit of what you've done with your life and liberty. Property is inseparably connected to your life and liberty because you purchased your property with your life and liberty. If you make $60,000 a year and you purchase a car that cost $30,000 and somebody steals that car. Now remember in algebra, when your algebra teacher taught you that when you take from one side of the equal sign, you must take from the other side of the equal sign. So if somebody steals that car and you never get that car back, what will you never get back as well? You have also lost 6 months of your life and the liberty that you spent in the decision of your career and deciding to go to work every day and what to buy, what not to, all those choices and decisions that you used your liberty or your agency to decide. You've also lost that. So that thief has not just stolen your property, but he has stolen 6 months of your life and your liberty as well. That's why if you've ever had something stolen from you, something large of value, or your home or your car broken into, you feel like something's been ripped out of you. And perhaps you've even beaten yourself up about it, thinking, why do I feel this way about such material objects? Well, it's because they have literally ripped something out of you. They took from you the life and liberty that you spent on that property. Now, when we use this equation, life plus liberty equals, and you'll notice I've changed this to the pursuit of happiness. See, Thomas Jefferson, when he penned the Declaration of Independence, he changed it to the pursuit of happiness because him and other founders believed that this more accurately depicted what property really is. So if we use this equation, life plus liberty equals property, or life plus liberty equals the pursuit of happiness, what in life is our property? We often think about our home or our car or our clothes or these tangible things, but what else do we spend our life and liberty on? What about our education, our knowledge, our intellect? We spend our life and liberty for that, so our knowledge and our intellect and education becomes our property. That's why with intellectual property, we have laws that protect that because it literally is our property. What about our relationships? That's why relationships are so special to us, because we know that the other party in the relationship has spent part of their life and their liberty for that relationship. This is when relationships usually fail, is when one member or both members of the relationship decide that they no longer want to spend their life and liberty and sacrifice that for the relationship. What about the good things that you do in your community or your society? Is that your property? Absolutely it is, because you spend your life and liberty for that. In fact, that's why charity is so sacred, because we are literally giving part of our life and our liberty to another human being, another individual. That's why government should never coerce charity or force us through taxation to give to other individuals, because that is not freely giving of our life and liberty. And when somebody, without our consent, takes our property or our life and liberty, we call that theft, not charity. But charity is very sacred because it literally is giving of your life and liberty. So if the good things that you do are your property, what about the bad things that you do? You've certainly heard the phrase owning your sins. You better believe it. You bought them. You spent your life and your liberty on your sins. Now I would define a sin as something of no value or perhaps even of negative value. No value would be idleness or something that just doesn't have any lasting value to it. Negative value would be where you're actually harming another or taking the life, liberty, or property of another. So that's negative value. That's wasting your life and liberty. See, you always know the value that you place on your life and liberty by the property that you're purchasing with that life and liberty. Now, you're wishing that I had never said that because you're thinking of times now in your life, you're thinking, boy, there are times when I have not had a high opinion of my life and liberty because the property that I've purchased has very little value. So if the bad things that we do in our life are our property, what if we go out and seek for forgiveness for those bad things? Is that our property, the forgiveness? Absolutely. We spend our life and our liberty in pursuit of that forgiveness. And so therefore, if forgiveness is our property, then can we not say that salvation is also our property? Now, the reason why I bring it to the point of salvation is because Jefferson once said that the ultimate form of happiness would be to return to that God that made us. So really, very literally, when he says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, he's saying spending your life and your liberty in pursuit of the things of lasting happiness or the things of lasting value. And the ultimate value, he said there, would be to return to that God that made us. Jefferson often spoke about how he would have much preferred to sit and stay in a very humble home on a little farm and be able to just spend every single day with his family and never have to worry about the cares of the outside world or never be involved in government and politics and things. You see, he saw those things as things of lasting value, to be with family and friends and education and all those important things. Life plus liberty equals the pursuit of happiness. Now, to go back to the question as to who is the only one that can have that car go from Mr. Smith to Mr. Jones, that Mr. Smith is the only one that can consent to it. Now, there's a couple reasons for this. First of all, because Mr. Smith purchased his car with his life and liberty. And so therefore that property is inseparably connected with his life and liberty. And we cannot take that car from him without also taking some of his life and his liberty at the same time. But there's also a fundamental reason why he is the only one that can dispose of that car. There's a fundamental natural law principle. The power to create is the power to destroy. So we might ask ourselves, who gives us life? Well, God gives us life. So who's the only one that has the right to take life? God is the only one that has the right to take life. Who gives us our liberty? Well, God gives us our liberty, and he bases it on natural law principles. So then the question is, who's the only one that can take away our liberty? God is the only one that can take away our liberty or the violation of natural law principles. So our next question, who gives us our property? To use that equation, life plus liberty equals property, leads us to conclude we do. God most certainly makes that property available to us for us to obtain, but we are the ones that actually obtain that property. And so therefore, we are the only ones that can take away that property by our consent. So Mr. Smith is inseparably connected to that property. Now, I've had the opportunity to teach a couple of state legislatures. And as I've taught them, the question has come up, how much can we spend on some of this delegated power, and how much is too much? And we've talked about that. And we've talked about often there's a bill that might come over their desk that is for some public safety bill. And it might be quite expensive. And as soon as somebody is brave enough, one legislator might be brave enough to say, this is way too expensive, the first thing they'll hear is, how can you put a price on a life? If it saves even just one life, how can you put a price on that life? Well, I can put a price on life. It's $1.2 million. Now, at this point, you might be looking around trying to find the price tag on your life. The reason why we can put a price of $1.2 million on a life is because if we're trying to put a tangible price on it, the average person will make an average of $1.2 million in their lifetime. So therefore, when the government spends $1.2 million of tax or public money, they have just spent a life. So for every $1.2 million they've spent a life. In fact, when we think about it that way, when we look at our current national debt, we realize that we not only have spent our lives away, but we have very literally spent the lives of our children, our grandchildren, and we are now spending the lives of our great-grandchildren away. It will take them their entire lives to help work off the debt that we have placed on their shoulders. It is absolutely immoral to do such a thing. So there's no question that Americans are willing to sacrifice their lives for the lives of others. And so we are happy to spend money on public safety to save people. But most certainly there can become a threshold when we have spent too many lives all in the name of protecting the lives or property of others. What a profound understanding life plus liberty equals property gives us. Now, the other thing that property does is it helps us to understand where we are in the political spectrum or where we are in our freedoms. Now, with the political spectrum, we have tyranny on one side and anarchy on the other side. We certainly don't want either one. And so we want to try to find ourselves placed in that balanced center. Now, property is really the only tangible thing that we can use to measure where we are with our freedoms. Life and liberty are not really all that tangible. And so property gives us this gauge. If we don't have the total right and control of our property because there's too much taxation or too much regulation, we know we're too far toward tyranny. If we don't have the total right and control of our property because of too much theft or too much fraud, we know we're too far toward anarchy. It's when we have the total right and control of our property that we know that we have found ourselves in the balanced center between tyranny and anarchy. James Madison said it like this: "Where an excess of power prevails, property of no sort is duly respected. No man is safe in his opinions, his persons, his faculties, or his possessions. Where there is an excess of liberty, the effect is the same, though from an opposite cause. This being the end of government, that alone is a just government which impartially secures to every man whatsoever is his own." So property becomes this beautiful gauge to tell us where we are with our freedoms and our liberties.